Sorry, there's a bit more of a buffering process. Thank you very much, Chair. We are now live.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Grenville Chamberlain, and I am the Chair of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee. I would like now to call upon Victoria, to our Democratic Service Officer, if she would kindly conduct a roll call so that we can be comfortable that we are quorate and all members are present. Victoria, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the names in alphabetical order for committee members. Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Present.
Councillor Martin Khan. I think Councillor Khan is here, but muted.
Okay.
Councillor Cathcart.
Present.
Councillor Chamberlain, goes without
Present.
saying. Councillor Chung Johnson.
Present.
Councillor Cone.
Present.
Councillor Daunton.
Present.
Councillor De Lacey.
Present.
Councillor Fain.
Present.
Councillor Jose Hales has sent apologies for the start of the meeting, certainly, and I cannot see that he is here currently. Councillor Harvey. I don't think Councillor Harvey's joined us yet. I'm just looking at the participants list. Councillor Hunt.
Present.
Councillor Rippeth.
Present.
And Councillor Richard Williams.
Present.
Thank you very much indeed. So I can now confirm that we are quorate, and so the meeting can begin in earnest.
You didn't ask. Sorry, you didn't ask me to say I was present.
My apologies. Who was that? Sorry.
Martin Khan.
Ah,
Were asked, but you weren't there at the time.
You were asked, Martin, but I think you were on mute.
thank you, Martin. We now know you're here. So a few housekeeping points, if I may, first of all. Can I ask you to please make sure that your device is fully charged or charging? And please switch off your microphones unless I invite you to speak. And when you have finished speaking, please turn off your microphone immediately. Please speak clearly and slowly and do not talk over or interrupt anyone. And if you wish to speak on an item, please indicate this using the chat function, which the Vice Chair will be managing for me. If any member has to leave during the meeting, please could they let this be known so that this can be recorded. And we had a very extensive pre-meet last night, so I'm going to be fairly strict on speakers, so please focus your minds and make sure that your questions are succinct and clear. There will, members, be a change to the order of the agenda items. Agenda item 6, which is the task and finish group for terms of reference, will be taken after item 4, as Councillor Chung Johnson may need to leave the meeting before we get to that particular item. Agenda item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. So may I ask Democratic Services if there have been any apologies of absence for the meeting, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Jose Hales. He has said that he'll join the meeting later if he can, but he may be unable to. And I cannot see that Jeff Harvey is at the meeting yet, but I've not received apologies, so presumably he'll be joining us later.
I'm sure he will. Thank you very much.
Chairman, it's Councillor Daunton here. I've sent Jeff a text just in case he didn't get the message about moving to Zoom.
That's kind. Thank you very much, Claire. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. May I ask if any members have interest that they would like to declare in relation to any items on the agenda, please? No? Thank you very much indeed. Item 3 on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 16th of July. I'm quite happy to go through page by page for accuracy. So let us start with page 1. Page 2.
Yes, Chairman.
Yeah, there is an error there, indeed.
So I raised that item 6 on page 2. I think it's the third bullet point up from the bottom. It says a decline in staff taking regular breaks was noted. And I think the between surveys was spurious wording that kind of found its way in there accidentally.
So we just need to remove between surveys. Thank you, Anna. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5.
Sorry. Chairman. Forgive me, I can't remember how we'd agreed we would deal with this. At page 3, at the bottom of the third paragraph of point 7, the Shared Services Annual Report, I noted that the Chief Executive had informed the committee that in cases where home internet had failed, officers had tethered their laptops to their phones, and I asked to be reassured that members of staff would not have incurred any costs on their own private data costs because of that. I think the answer was that most of them would have used their district council mobile phone, and I just wanted to be assured that they hadn't incurred any costs on that.
Can I ask the Chief Executive if you can confirm?
Yeah, absolutely. So most people use their work mobiles. If they're using home mobiles and there's a problem with their data, then we are able to refund payments.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
So page 4 for accuracy.
Sorry, I don't know that one.
Page 5. Page 6. And page 7. Is it therefore, if everyone is content and subject to that amendment, are you happy that I should at some point in the future, goodness only knows when, sign them as a true record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Is anyone against?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 4 relates to public questions, and I can confirm that there are no public questions, but you ought to be aware that there was one question submitted, but that was received later than the cut-off date, and I have declined to accept it as that question had also been subject to the FOI inquiry. So we now move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the task and finish group terms of reference. Now, just before I ask
Excuse me, Chair. What about item 5?
Oh, my apologies. Thank you very much. I'm jumping forward too fast. Item 5 on the agenda. Sorry, no, let me get this right. We did agree at the beginning of the meeting that we would move item 6 in advance of item 5, as Councillor Chung Johnston has to leave perhaps before we get to that on the agenda. So
okay, that's fine. I wasn't at the start of the meeting. Apologies.
Okay, my apologies. We'll deal with item 6 first, and then we'll move to item 5. In terms of item 5, we had a lengthy discussion about this in the pre-meet last night, and that 2 recommendations were made. The first came from Councillor Douglas de Lacey, that he felt that a more appropriate title to the group could be considered, and that was something that Councillor Chung Johnson was happy to take away. And under item 4, that we should conduct an audit of street names, places, and any public monuments. Now, I'm more than happy for Councillor Chung Johnston to add anything further if she wishes. If not, we could perhaps take the draft terms of reference as read. Councillor Chung Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for moving this item forward. I've got to chair the Northstowe Forum shortly. So as discussed in the pre-meeting, the terms of reference, the task and finish group have met twice now. And thank you to officers' support, both Victoria and Aaron, for supporting us on that. The terms of reference are pretty straightforward. I would reiterate that we are a part of the Scrutiny Committee and I chair that committee, but any decisions that are made will come back to Scrutiny. So they will not be made by the task and finish group. We are merely reviewing, analysing, and having meetings with other officers in the council to meet these to meet the items on this terms of reference.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions regarding the draft terms of reference, please?
Chairman, it's Councillor Bradnam.
Councillor Bradnam, yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that what Councillor Chung Johnson just said was that the task and finish group would always make recommendations back to this committee. That's what I understood the task and finish group would do. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
The task and finish group's report will come back to us in due course. And
no, but as recommendations is what I meant.
Oh yes,
it's as recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chair, Councillor De Lacy would like to speak.
Councillor De Lacy, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like through you to ask Councillor Chung Johnson if she has thought about a change of name or whether she's happy with the name as it stands. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So you raised this yesterday in the pre-meeting, and I think, well, I agree with you that we need to ensure, because the whole purpose of this motion is about equalities and inclusiveness. So we need to ensure that we don't, you know, from the get-go, create division where there isn't any. So I'm happy to take that back to the task and finish group, and we will review that and hopefully come back to the group with some suggestions or a recommendation, sorry, for a name change. Again, as I said, I'm only chairing this, so I don't want to be doing it on behalf of the whole group. So we will come back the next scrutiny meeting with a suggestion for recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair, sorry, Councillor Hunt would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I was still wondering, through you, Chair, if I could ask Councillor Chung Johnson whether the remit or activities will include looking to other councils to find examples of best practices and so forth that we could leverage.
Yes, absolutely it is. So, for example, on name blind recruitment, one of the things that HR will be looking at is how this is done, not in only on other councils, but obviously other companies will have similar issues where they face how do you do it in a fair way. So we'll be looking at best practice across the industry, not just councils.
Thank you.
Where appropriate.
Thank you very much indeed. I have no further questions. Can I take it therefore that we are content with the terms of reference, and we wish Councillor Chung Johnson very well on her mission, and I hope it comes very successful for her. I'm sure it will. Is everyone content?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So now we move to item 5 on the agenda, and I'm going to ask Councillor John Williams to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's right for us to be open about in what circumstances we may seek compulsory purchase powers. And this compulsory purchase order policy, which explains the approach, circumstances and conditions, I think will be welcomed by our residents and businesses. To make it clear, at this moment in time, we have no plans to use compulsory purchase powers. This report before you is purely to establish a policy framework which is clear and transparent. The proposed policy recognises that compulsory purchase powers should be a last resort and provides residents with a clear understanding of the general approach to be adopted, what level of compensation, if any, that might be offered, and the practical guidance and support that this council can provide to those affected. This council has threatened to use compulsory powers in the past. This was used in Fulbourn to unblock an impasse with the Swifts housing development to deliver meaningful negotiations. But the approach and mechanism for doing it was ad hoc and unclear, as the council had no policy framework to work within. Also, we have been asked to use a compulsory purchase order to acquire the tree in Stapleford, but once again had no CPO policy against which to judge the request. The introduction to the policy on page 14 of the agenda pack explains that the council will consider compulsory purchase powers to acquire a property for the purpose of carrying out development, redevelopment or improvement on or in relation to the land, so that it promotes or improves the economic, social and environmental well-being of its area. This could range from the provision of social housing to the creation of wildlife habitat. Under legal context, we explain the powers available to us and in what circumstances we can use them. In particular, the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 gives us a broad scope, but as paragraph 13 on page 16 of your agenda pack explains, we must not exercise our power unless we think that the proposed development, redevelopment or improvement is likely to contribute to achieving the promotion or improvement of the economic, social or environmental well-being of the area for which we have administrative responsibility. The policy then goes on to explain how we will consult, and I cannot emphasize enough that our intention is always to seek a voluntary acquisition, and how we will acquire at the market value, and how that market value is arrived at, given the owner the opportunity to negotiate with appeal to the Lands Chamber. The policy also deals with compensation payments for owners and tenants. Finally, the policy also sets the framework for community assets and bringing empty properties back into use. There is one change to the document I will be asking Cabinet to consider, and that is that the Chief Operating Officer be the accountable officer to ensure that there can be no suggestion of bias with regard to housing. So the adoption of a compulsory purchase policy would provide a consistent approach requiring justification as part of a decision-making process, and I ask you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Williams. I am aware that there are a number of questions coming forward on this particular item, and I believe that first we have Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in relation to the points 1 to 5 on page 14 of the agenda, I was very pleased to hear Councillor Williams particularly highlighting the usefulness of having a policy in relation to not only conventional infrastructure but also green infrastructure, and sort of cognizant of the fact that there may be situations where we need to, for example, in the creation of contiguous green space, or for example, for creating access to existing green space, there may be applications of this policy which are actually outside of being particularly related to a conventional housing development. And then I just wondered, for consistency, therefore, whether in paragraph 5, if I can read it, says compulsory purchase is intended as a last resort to secure the assembly of land and property for development, and then to add in there and environmental net gain, because I feel in paragraph 5 tends to sort of revert back to the sort of conventional sort of view on compulsory purchase as being mainly an instrument for facilitating sort of conventional development.
Can I respond to that now?
Yes, please. Yeah, please go ahead.
Certainly, Councillor Harvey, I'm quite, I quite agree with you, and I agree that we could alter paragraph 5 in that way.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Khan, Chair, would like to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Khan.
Yes, fine. Mine's linked actually to that. I was going to comment that in the specific legislative provisions, I think they're probably wider provisions. I know myself that over 40 years ago, I was involved in the first compulsory purchase order for land for a local nature reserve, which is one provision under the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act 1949. So there are other provisions. Presumably there are further provisions for different services where compulsory purchase is allowed. And I think we don't want to constrain ourselves. So adding other different acts which might be involved, or some general comment about the other provisions, which would allow us to take account of future changes. In terms of the comment, this of course relates therefore to the same comments that Councillor Harvey was making related to the purposes of compulsory purchase. And I was thinking more in terms of some statement to protect land from development or inappropriate management, by the sort of comment that one might make to determine other types of uses. But there may well be other purposes as well, which are for social reasons, for instance, which might not come into the cover of the description you've had. And then perhaps in item 6, talk about environmental protection in addition to urban and rural regeneration. Might be other issues that you might include. But in terms of the principle of the whole of the policy, very much in favour. And my experience of this compulsory purchase order over 40 years ago was that it was used as a last resort, where land was being damaged, and the only way to protect it was to actually serve a compulsory purchase order, because the damage could not be prevented any other way. So that's exactly the sort of scope and the context which you were describing.
Thank you very much.
Chair Liz Watts would like to speak, maybe to clarify something.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to wait in the queue.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Liz. So next we have
Councillor Bradnam.
Councillor Bradnam. Please go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, I had thought, and I'm sorry if I missed Councillor Khan saying it, but I thought Councillor Khan was perhaps going to suggest an addition under the paragraph 8 after item D, that was to say something like, and other acts where appropriate power is given. That was the only thing I just wanted to clarify on that. But my own question was, under the community assets specific provisions, I wondered if officers could give an example of how the power might be used in the case of somewhere like the tree, where how that power would have been used to assist us in that situation.
Councillor Williams, are you able to take that, or do we have? You're mute, Councillor Williams.
Councillor Smith has, Bridget Smith has suggested she knows.
Sorry, we did look.
Councillor Smith has too. Councillor Williams, can you take it?
Sorry, didn't catch that.
Councillor Williams, can you take that question, or?
Well, I was going to say that the particular example of the tree has been considered by Cabinet, and it was agreed that it was not something that we would want to pursue, and it was looked at within the context of the compulsory purchase order. But Cabinet made that decision on a basis that it was not something that we felt the council should continue with. So I'm not quite sure what your question is, Councillor Bradnam.
Can I clarify the question? The question was, under what circumstances would this power be helpful to us? I mean, I'm not referring to the tree, except in that was one where we didn't think it was useful, or didn't have the policy. But I'm just trying to work out under what circumstances we might use this with regard to a community asset, because of course the registration of the community asset allows time for the community to perhaps gather their money together and purchase the building if they can. But if the community can't raise the money but do desperately want to keep the asset, would they then be able to come to the council and ask us to purchase? Is that how it would be used?
I think the leader would like to come in. So if I may, Councillor Williams, I'd like to ask the leader to respond, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I think, actually, with all due respect to Councillor Bradnam, I think talking about past examples possibly isn't helpful here. The important thing to me is that we have a clear policy in place so that residents, community groups, developers and so on can see clearly what our policy is. And it quite clearly states that this is a compulsory purchase is an absolute last resort. It's not something that any of us want to do particularly. You know, it's a sign that all other avenues have failed, but it's very important that we have it in place because situations do arise where all other avenues fail, and and it's really important to get things moving, be it to allow affordable housing to be developed, be it to allow a community asset to be retained and protected. So this is about general principles, and it's about the transparency to anybody who is interested, really, that we have a clear policy in place, because it's been jolly difficult in the past when we haven't had this, and we've had to be we've had to be clarifying what our position is kind of on the hoof. So this is to put right something that needed to be put right. And it's a very general policy, but the main point is that this is action of last resort. It is not something that is desirable and not something that we will be leaping into if there are any other easier means of resolving issues.
Thank you very much, Leader.
Sorry, I wasn't making any reference to the tree in this case. I was simply saying, how would it work? Because there's time allowed, isn't there? And I just wanted to say, is that during that time when the community are asked if they want to buy, or the community express a wish to buy and then they can't raise the money, would they then be in a position to come to the council and say, we'd like to purchase the building which we'd like to make into a village hall, but we haven't got the resources to do it? Is that how it would work?
Page 21 of the document goes through that.
Yeah, exactly.
So if I could interject here, so you know, it has been my experience that community groups wanting to buy a community asset, but facing challenges over either the amount that's being asked for a community asset or in their ability to fundraise, have suggested that, and this is referenced in the paper, that the possibility of compulsory purchase does actually help to move things along. But that is something that would have to be considered on a case-by-case basis. You know, it depends on many other circumstances, but that is referenced in the paper, that in some circumstances, either people who might be selling land, or people who want to buy land or premises or whatever, you know, their case might be helped by knowing that compulsory purchase was an opportunity there. But again, on a case-by-case basis, we can't generalise about these things. And it is referenced in the paper.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it's Councillor Rippeth this time.
It is, yes. I'm remembering to speak myself. On page 16, a question for Councillor John Williams. Paragraph 16, you say wherever possible, if this were the case with a compulsory purchase order, ensure that any information provided to people living in the same block, scheme or street will be provided simultaneously. I do think wherever possible is maybe not quite good enough. If people receive information at different times, I mean, why that phrasing? Why not definitely?
Well, of course, the people might be away. You know, they might be on holiday. We can't guarantee that everybody will receive the information at the same time. We will make every effort to do that, but we cannot guarantee that.
Okay, so postal kind of services, you know, permitting is basically what it means.
We just can't guarantee that everyone will know at the same time.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Richard Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to start by saying I very much welcome this. I think it's very good that the council adopts this kind of policy and we've got these principles in place. So overall, I'm very, very supportive of the policy. I just had two questions on particular points. In paragraph 29, where we talk about where a homeowner disagrees with the council's valuation of the property, this is on page 18, and the valuation of the property, they will be encouraged to obtain independent valuations. I just wondered if there might be something we could do, whether we would include this in the policy, I don't know, but how would we deal with a vulnerable resident in this kind of scenario? Because it's all very well to say get an independent valuation. There may be residents who we owe a duty of care to who might not be able to do that so easily. So I wondered if we might, even if we don't address that in this policy, might think through how we'd deal with those kinds of situations. And then just a small point, which is, I think, mostly a drafting point. On page 20, paragraph 51, so what covers page 2021, I was just a bit unsure about what was meant by the first paragraph. And it says local authorities can receive requests from community or local bodies to use compulsory purchase powers, which, and then it lists a sort of series of examples. I don't think they're intended to be limiting. I don't think it's intended that we would only look at acquiring community assets where, for example, it's been designated as an asset of the community. But I wasn't quite sure from reading it whether that was intended or not. So we might want to maybe look at the drafting there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Williams. They're both two very good points and we'll take them on board.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cathcart.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a couple of points. Yes, I also welcome this this paper because, I mean, as far as I understand it, local authorities like ours are the only ones who can actually exercise compulsory purchase powers. It's not an option available to private developers or presumably even parish councils or community groups. So it's important that we actually retain this as a matter of last resort, and I fully take on board it is a matter of last resort, but having clarity in this document does make it as an option, a distant option, more possible than it was before, especially of community assets and assets of value to the local community. But I've just got a few concerns. One is, I think it's important we have an exit strategy, because if we acquire it, sometimes we have to acquire an asset which is neglected, a house or even a row of houses. We need to make sure that we actually do have some means of discharging our obligations, improving them, either selling them on or transferring to our housing stock. I recall years ago in Bassingbourn, the only case I can remember of compulsory purchase order where we, a neglected building that was actually, it was a listed building, we acquired it for £1, and the day later we sold it for £20,000. So not only did we have an asset which we passed on to someone who's going to restore it, we actually made a big profit on it. That won't happen in every case, but I think we do need a clear exit strategy for cases where we do take them on. The other issue I think is really relating to that, and that's a question of resources. These issues of compulsory purchase can be very rich on prevailing on officer time, and also they can actually take considerable financial resources, probably only in a short term, but we do need to be clearly in mind the resource implications. I recall also years ago we had a fund for when we wanted to acquire a listed buildings under compulsory purchase order. I think it's unlikely we would have a designated fund, but we need to have some clarity on the financial implications of taking on these assets in many cases. So I think that they're the only points I really wish to make, except I think there's a topic on page oh dear, on page 16 at the top of the page, it says it is intended to be used primarily to acquire land which is not required for development, redevelopment, improvement. It looked to me as though that was the not isn't should be there. It should acquire land which is required for development, redevelopment, improvement, or as part of such a scheme. But you know, you need to make those sort of basic points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure there was a question in that, was there?
Well, no, there wasn't. Well, no, it just made the point that we needed to have clarity on the exit strategy, and we need to be clear on the resource implications.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure doing that on a case-by-case basis is exactly what would happen. So we come to the Chief Executive. Liz Watts, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it was just a point on the governance paragraph at the very end of the report. So fully agree that it should be the Chief Operating Officer who's the lead officer accountable. Could we just add in there, or the Chief Executive? So there will be some times when the Chief Operating Officer acting in her role on the investment partnership may be on the other side of the table in terms of needing a CPO, at which point it would not be appropriate for her to be making a decision about the CPO. So if we could just add both of us in, that covers the governance issue.
I'm sure that would be fine. Thank you. Next, I think it's Councillor Jeff Harvey.
Yes, sorry if I may. Thank you, Chair. Return briefly to paragraph 5 on page 14. I think I meant to flag that in the third line, where we talk about to improve substandard or defective residential and commercial properties. I wonder if we might want to consider explicitly inserting the word including energy efficiency in relation to defective.
I don't know about that. I'd have to, I'm not sure, would we be legally, would that be a legal reason? I don't know. We'd have to think, we'd have to look at that.
Yeah. Would you like to take that one away and think about it, Councillor Williams? Thank you. Councillor Bridget Smith.
I'm sorry, that's a historic one.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. Councillor Steve Hunt.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. So one thing, I had a quick search and I found that there are other councils that have a CPO policy. And I just wondered whether we've kind of, you know, referred to those to when drafting this to see if we can learn from what they've done. And the other point is more about sort of, it seems like something where when we announce this, it might strike fear into some people that we're about to go on some purchasing spree, and how are we going to message this so that doesn't happen? It reassures our parish councils and residents.
Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, yes, it does take on board what some other councils have done already, and in large part it actually copies some what other councils have policies on this. So far as I hope in my introduction I made it quite clear that we have no intention at the moment to carry out any compulsory purchase, and that this is obviously you know, an instrument of last resort, and I think, you know, everyone can ensure that message gets out. You know, there's no hidden agenda behind this. This is just to ensure that we don't, you know, we have something on the shelf in place, a framework that the officers can work within. We don't have to, at very short notice, produce a policy in order to meet a particular circumstance. But as I say, at the moment, we have no plans to compulsory purchase anything in the district.
Yeah, thanks. If I could just come back with your permission, Chair, I certainly appreciate that's the intention as well. I'm sure we all do and approve of the idea of having it, but it's really important that the people out there know that too. So let's make sure we message it well. Thank you.
If I might just add, of course, the leader has also stressed that point during her comments. So it's pretty strongly mentioned right across the board. Councillor Martin Khan.
3 speakers left.
Yeah, a couple of additional points which are arisen, and again, it comes back to my previous experience on this. In terms of 26, paragraph 26 about the council's offer being at open market value, a point I think may be worth pointing out is that it's for market value for legal use. When this occasion that we had, the land was being used for tipping to supposedly create agricultural land, which was actually illegal. When it was the claim for compensation came, they wanted claiming for value as a tip rather than as wasteland, and that was proved to be the provision in that situation is that only the legal use is allowed. I think it would be useful to state that it's for illegal use, because that's exactly the sort of situation where that issue might come up. Secondly, another reason which compulsory purchase orders are used, I believe, is when the land ownership is unknown, and it's a tool you can use, therefore, to purchase land which you cannot detect where the owner is. And I think that might be a useful thing to draw attention to a state, that it can be used for that purpose, because otherwise you can't actually purchase the land if you don't know who owns it. And so I think that would be a worthwhile thing, citing, for instance, in paragraph 56.
Thank you very much. Next, is that Councillor Cathcart? Do you have another point, or is that historic?
We can't hear you.
Yes, I'm sorry to come back. Just the question I touched on, a question of listed buildings and neglected buildings and conservation areas. This was one area which I recall when we 20 years ago or so, which was an important element, and I think it's important to have it there as an absolute last backstop, because it was used, I recall, and it was a mere threat of the actual CPO which often did the trick. When repairs notices, when letters, when cajoles, when negotiations had all failed, it was felt that CPO may be there as a last resort. So I think as a special, it is important to have it there, preferably actually in writing in the documents. So, as I say, listed buildings or important buildings in conservation areas could, in extreme circumstances, be subject to CPO when all other negotiations and all other avenues to secure the improvement or the security of the property have failed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bradman, that's the last speaker that I have.
Thank you. I was just thinking about land, and Councillor Harvey mentioned it right at the beginning. I was wondering if there are circumstances in which we want to be able to use this power to acquire little tiny quadrants, quarters of land that are between other bits of land that make the rest of that land coherent. And so I wondered if because otherwise they might be held up as ransom strips against things. So I was just wondering whether we could put something in paragraph 5 in that third line, where it says, as a last resort, to secure the assemblage of land. Or do you think that covers it, John? Sorry, this is to Councillor Williams. Do you feel that that statement covers that possibility?
Through the chair, if you wouldn't mind. And we will.
Sorry.
We will invite Councillor Williams to respond.
Thank you. But to be honest with you, the less detailed we make this, the better.
Yeah, I agree.
Because it gives us much more breadth to take action.
Certainly.
The more we put in particular, more we focus in on particular things, the more difficult it then becomes when we're challenged. And so I'm reluctant to make it more specific than it is. I mean, I'm taking up the previous Councillor Cathcart's comments about listed buildings. I mean, if you look at paragraph 62, to be honest with you, that covers everything, you know, listed buildings and non-listed buildings. And I to say, I'd be very reluctant to put specific points in this more than is necessary.
I think if you keep it wide, you can then act on anything you choose. And it is inclusive. And I think...
Entry on speakers, Councillor Fane.
Councillor Peter Fane. You are on mute at the moment. Not there.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did want to ask a question in relation to, actually it specifically relates to paragraph 22, but to explain this, there have been a number of pointed out here that there are other authorities have compulsory purchase powers and a wide range of possible circumstances can exist. For instance, there might be a need to, we've talked about ACVs, there might also be a need to acquire land where agreement has not been possible to be reached on playing fields or recreation grounds, though that would normally be covered under the county council's powers within a two-tier system. And of course, the vast majority of compulsory purchase in this area will be carried out not by any local authority, but by government on behalf of private companies. Often compulsory purchase powers now are for or on behalf of private companies, parish councils, or indeed community groups. I think the leader made an important point that the certainty that this would give us can be very important in shortcutting the process. Often we don't need to proceed to vesting, that is to conclusion. Agreement will be reached, but it is more likely to be reached and potential sellers are more likely to act reasonably in relation to a purchase proposal, for instance, on an ACV, where they know whether those compulsory purchase powers are available and might be used. And without wishing to delve into past cases, there are ACVs within the district which have now been, the buildings have now been derelict for over 6 years. And frankly, I think that an agreement would have been reached many years ago if we had had this code in place and both parties had known what was likely to happen. That continuing uncertainty was a problem. My particular point on paragraph 22 bears in mind all of that. That is, we talk about it will be compulsory purchased at market value. As is very clear from further down, sections 20, paragraph 26 onwards, market value has to be very carefully qualified in this case. And we don't want to go into all of that in paragraph 22, which is just an introduction. But it would be wrong to say that it will always be market value. There are other bases of compensation set out in the LCA, and indeed the compulsory code that would apply is not a matter for us. We can't, I think, opt out of that should we progress a compulsory purchase. So I think it's important we don't say it will be compulsory purchased at market value, but usually at market value. I think Councillor Cathcart mentioned a case where it clearly was not purchased at market value. £1 was not the market value in that case, as evidenced by the subsequent sale. And that may happen in other cases where negotiations are going on. So we need to be very careful not to limit our options too much by the use of that phrase.
Councillor Williams, might I ask you to?
Yeah, I think that's a good point by Councillor Fane, and we'll take that on board with regard to that paragraph.
Thank you very much indeed. I have no further speakers, so subject to the various comments that have made, the recommendation is set out in paragraph 3 of the paper. We are invited to consider the adoption of the compulsory purchase order as the basis for considering the use of compulsory purchase powers to acquire land and property interests for the purpose of carrying out development, redevelopment or improvement where there is a compelling case in the public interest for doing so. Can I ask, is anyone against? No? Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That is therefore approved. So we come now to agenda item 7 on the agenda, which is the Scrutiny and Overview Committee work programme. That is set out for you right through from November 2020 through until February 21. But I would like to add that we have had Councillor Rippeth. I met the leader and chief executive just a couple of weeks ago. We have had our first triangulation meeting, and we have a number of projects which are which have been identified and we would like to progress. And we, Councillor Rippeth and I, will be meeting with Democratic Services in the next few days in order to plan those coming forward. So the work programme that you see at the moment will be subject to change, but I hope that we can introduce subjects which will significantly add value to the work of the Scrutiny Committee, and we'll bring those forward in due course. Does anyone
Peter
have
Campbell has, sorry, Chair, sorry to interrupt. Peter Campbell has asked to speak as Councillor Chung Johnson and just Councillor Milnes.
Right.
Sorry, my request was to do with the previous item, which you've now moved on from.
Apologies.
Okay. Councillor Chung Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. Given today's another IT outage, would it be something we could bring back to scrutiny?
Yes.
Sorry, the ICT outages and reviewing their investigations from the last time it happened and obviously what happened today.
I think today's was a particular problem, but perhaps could I ask the Chief Exec if she'd like to just comment on that briefly? Well, I have a cough.
I'm happy to bring an item back, picking up all of those points raised in terms of the different outages. Today's, I haven't quite understood the detail of it yet. We are all back up and running now, I believe, but happy to bring something back. I know we'll be getting an incident report from today, and there has been one from the previous item, which was, I think, 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Yes.
So happy whenever you want to put that on your agenda, Chair.
Thanks. We'll perhaps do that at the next meeting, I think. Thank you very much. Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Chair. How are you?
So, I've been fine since I saw you this morning.
Good. We're all flu jabbing. It was nice to see everybody in the car park. I'd just like to ask you where you're at in the triangulation meetings and whether you've appointed members of the committee to interact with the cabinet members. I'm sorry if I've missed that somewhere, but I couldn't see where that was mentioned. Oh, and with the leap and a bound, he was gone. What? Where have you gone, Granville?
I think Grenville has dropped out.
I thought I was quite polite, really, and friendly and everything.
It would appear that that Grenville has indeed dropped out of the meeting.
Well, perhaps I don't know whether his vice chair can answer the
to
question, Judith.
Pause. We need to pause whilst we wait for the return of Councillor Chamberlain, the chair.
We can give him a couple of minutes just to come back in before addressing the question. He should be back with us shortly, hopefully. Victoria is just ringing. Oh, here he's just back in the meeting now. He's just rejoining us.
He's returned, or is returning.
We had a very brief power cut here. Thank goodness it came back on fairly quickly. So, Councillor Milnes, my apologies.
No worries.
I didn't mean to cut you off in your prime.
I thought it was something I'd said. Triangulation meetings. I'm just wondering where we're at in the process. I think the idea was to appoint a member of the Scrutiny Committee to meet with members of the Cabinet to do advanced work, early work on policy and strategy. And I just wondered how far you got with that, what we might expect to become involved.
We've already had our first triangulation meeting, and Councillor Rippeth and I will be meeting with Democratic Services in the next few days, and we will be coming forward with our plans to the next meeting.
So are we expecting in the next month or so to start those meetings?
We've already had the first one.
Yes. So for the rest of us,
the next meeting we will set out exactly what our plans are for how we progress the results of that triangulation meeting. So bear with us until the next meeting, and we'll set it all up for you.
Thank you.
No, I've lost the chat function now. Was that?
And that was the final person to speak on agenda item 7, as far as I know.
Thank you very much indeed.
The Lacey's had to leave the meeting temporarily.
Thanks. So we come now to item 8 on the agenda, but that requires, that next item contains confidential information which is commercially sensitive. And I propose that the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of agenda items 8 and 9 in accordance with section 100 brackets A4 of the Local Government Act 1972 on the grounds that if present, there would be a disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in para 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act. Does the committee agree that the public interest is outweighed by the recommendation to exclude the press and public for these agenda items? Does anyone object? No. Thank you very much indeed. In that case, Aaron, could I ask you please to end the live stream?